She looked at me with a quiet challenge in her eyes. If you walk away, you'll always wonder what if. And in that moment, I realized some risks are worth taking. There was something about the way she moved that caught me off guard. It wasn't the usual kind of attention-grabbing presence, no loud entrances or flashy gestures. Instead, it was subtle, like a soft melody that slowly settles in your mind without you noticing until it's there, echoing in your thoughts. I first saw her in a small cafe downtown, the kind of place where the light filters in through tall windows, casting long shadows across worn wooden tables. She sat alone, a book open in front of her, fingers gently tracing the edges of the pages. Her hair caught the sunlight, soft waves of silver mixed with the warmth of chestnut brown, like the quiet dawn breaking over the horizon. There was a grace to her, a stillness that seemed to hold both strength and fragility. Our eyes met across the room, just for a moment, but it was enough. Not a spark of instant connection or wild attraction, but something quieter, deeper, like a whispered secret between two strangers. I felt the air shift, a subtle weight settling in my chest. Her gaze was steady, calm, but with a flicker of something unreadable beneath the surface. It made me wonder who she was, what story she carried. I found myself watching without really meaning to, how she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear, how her lips curved faintly as if caught in an unspoken thought. The soft sound of her laughter floated through the room when the barista called her name, and for a moment, I imagined what it would be like to be the one who made her laugh like that. But I told myself to stop. She was a mystery, distant and delicate, and I was just an observer. Days passed, and somehow, I kept running into her. In the park where the trees were just starting to shed their autumn leaves, in the quiet aisles of the bookstore, even on the crowded subway where personal space was a rare luxury. Each time, our encounters were brief, almost accidental, yet they lingered longer than they should have in my thoughts. There was no awkwardness, no forced conversation, just silent acknowledgement. A nod, a glance, a half-smile that felt like a gentle greeting from a place both familiar and foreign. I noticed the way she carried herself, confident, but never arrogant. There was a softness in her eyes, a vulnerability carefully hidden beneath layers of experience. She didn't try to impress or rush. She simply existed, fully present and quietly magnetic. One chilly evening, as the sky turned from pale blue to a deep indigo, I saw her sitting on a bench near the river, wrapped in a woolen coat that looked both elegant and practical. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of earth and distant rain. I hesitated, wanting to say something, but unsure if I should interrupt the peaceful solitude that seemed to surround her. Instead, I sat down a few feet away, careful not to invade her space. The river murmured softly beside us, and the city lights flickered like distant stars. She didn't look at me, but I felt her presence like a quiet warmth beside me. In that shared silence, something unspoken passed between us, an invitation or perhaps a test. I wanted to ask her name. I wanted to know if she felt the same pull I did, the curious thread that seemed to tie us together despite our differences in age, life, and stories. But the words caught in my throat. What if I was wrong? What if she wanted to stay a beautiful mystery? Still, I watched as she tucked her hands under her coat, fingers brushing against the soft fabric like she was seeking comfort. It struck me then how much courage it must take to carry your past, your fears, your hopes, and still show up in the world with quiet dignity. I realized she was someone who had lived through storms and calm seas alike. Someone who had loved and lost, and maybe, just maybe, was waiting to find something new. As I sat there, feeling the cold seep into my bones, but also the warmth of possibility, I understood the slow-burn nature of what was beginning. This wasn't going to be a story of sudden passion or reckless abandon. It would be patient, tender, a dance of glances, moments, and hesitations that built something lasting beneath the surface. The night wrapped around us like a soft blanket, and as she finally stood to leave, our eyes met once more. This time, the look was longer, filled with a quiet understanding and a hint of something more. She didn't say a word, but the message was clear. There was a story here, waiting to be told. If only I dared to listen. It happened in the smallest, most unremarkable way. A fleeting touch, accidental but electric. Sometimes, those moments slip into your life quietly, like the first crack of dawn spilling light through a cracked window, and you don't realize how much they mean until you feel the warmth long after they've passed. We were at the same little gallery opening, a gathering of soft voices and muted colors on the walls. The kind of event where people talk about art, but mostly just linger in the gentle hum of shared presence. She stood near a painting that caught her eye, her posture relaxed yet poised, like she belonged to another world, one full of grace and history, unlike my own. I approached cautiously, not wanting to disturb, but curious all the same. She turned toward me just as I stepped closer, and our eyes met with that familiar, quiet recognition. There was a calmness in her expression, but something else too, a spark that hadn't been there before. Maybe it was the way the gallery light caught the subtle shimmer in her hair, or how the soft lines of her face softened further as she smiled. As we talked, our conversation was light but genuine, small pieces of ourselves shared without pressure. Her voice was low and steady, like a comforting rhythm that invited me in. At one point, I reached to adjust a sleeve that had slipped down her arm, a simple gesture, but the moment stretched between us, weighty and full of possibility. Our skin met, just briefly, my fingers grazing her wrist as I tucked the fabric back in place. I felt the heat beneath her skin, soft and steady, and a quiet shiver ran through me. It was a touch that spoke of trust and tentative connection, not desire or impatience. Her hand lingered near mine for a heartbeat longer, and I caught the slight catch in her breath, the subtle tightening of her fingers. That touch was a language of its own. It said, "I'm here. You can be here too." The gallery buzzed softly around us. The low murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, the faint scent of oil paint mingling with her subtle perfume. But all I noticed was her, the warmth radiating from that simple contact, the electric pulse beneath our skin that neither of us dared to name aloud. For a moment, I was acutely aware of everything, the roughness of my palm, the softness of her wrist, the faint pulse under her skin that seemed to sync with my own. It was a delicate, intimate thing that didn't require words, only presence. I wanted to linger in that feeling, but the moment slipped away as quickly as it came. We stepped back slightly, both a little breathless, caught off guard by the intensity of such a small gesture. I noticed her cheeks had flushed a soft rose, and her eyes held that same flicker of hesitation mixed with something deeper, perhaps hope, or the cautious stirrings of something more. Later, as I walked home beneath the stars, the memory of her touch stayed with me. It wasn't just the physical sensation, it was the promise in that fleeting contact, the fragile thread connecting us that whispered of something waiting to grow. There was also a quiet awareness of the barriers we faced, the age that separated us, the differences in our worlds, the cautious boundaries we had both built around ourselves. But in that touch, all those worries felt distant, like they might be softened over time, step by step. I imagined her again, how her fingers might feel brushing against mine in the quiet dark, how her skin might warm beneath my palm as we sat side by side on some future evening, close enough to hear each other's breathing. The thought sent a quiet thrill through me, tempered by the knowledge that we were only just beginning this slow, tentative dance. That night, before sleep claimed me, I found myself replaying the moment, the way her hand hesitated, the way our eyes locked just a little longer than necessary. It was a silent conversation, a beginning whispered in the language of touch. I realized then that sometimes, it's the smallest acts that carry the heaviest weight, the briefest contact that opens the door to trust, to something real. And maybe, just maybe, it was the first step toward discovering what could be it was a quiet evening, the kind that seems to invite reflection. We found ourselves alone in her cozy living room, a space filled with soft lighting, well-worn books, and the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the air. The kind of place where silence doesn't feel empty but comforting, as if it's waiting for something meaningful to unfold. She offered me a cup of tea, her hand steady but gentle as she passed it across the small wooden table. I noticed the subtle warmth radiating from the porcelain, the delicate clink as it settled in my palm. It was in these small gestures, so simple, so ordinary, that the first threads of trust began to weave between us. We started to talk, carefully at first, sharing fragments of our pasts as if testing the waters. Her voice was calm, but I sensed the weight behind her words, the years that had shaped her, the losses she carried quietly beneath her composed exterior. She spoke of moments when life had been unkind, of regrets that lingered like shadows at the edge of memory. But there was no bitterness, only a deep, thoughtful acceptance. As she spoke, I watched her face, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes when she smiled, the way her fingers absently traced the rim of her cup, the softness in her eyes that flickered between vulnerability and strength. I felt honored to be the one she chose to share this with, even if just a sliver. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Opening up felt unfamiliar, almost fragile, but something in her presence made it easier. I told her about my hopes, some tentative, some reckless, and about the quiet loneliness that sometimes settled in, despite the noise of the world around me. I spoke of my admiration for her, not in words of flattery, but as a genuine recognition of who she was, someone shaped by experience, carrying her story with grace. Our conversation deepened, each confession drawing us closer. She laughed softly at something I said, the sound like a warm breeze that stirred the quiet air. In that moment, I noticed how her shoulders relaxed, how her eyes sparkled with a light I hadn't seen before. There was a pause then, a silence rich with unspoken feelings. I reached out, almost instinctively, and tucked a stray lock of hair behind her ear. The touch was gentle, reverent, and I could feel the slight tremor beneath her skin. Her gaze held mine, steady but searching, as if seeking reassurance or perhaps offering it in return. I realized how rare it was to find someone willing to share this kind of intimacy without judgment or expectation. There was no rush here, just a careful unfolding of two people learning to trust again. The room around us faded into soft shadows, but the space between us seemed to glow with something warmer. Her hand rested lightly on the table near mine, fingers curling just enough to invite connection without forcing it. I felt the pulse of life in that touch, subtle yet undeniable. We spoke of fears too, the quiet worries that often go unspoken. She confessed how difficult it was to be seen and understood beyond the surface, especially with the age difference that lingered between us like an invisible barrier. I shared my own doubts about fitting into a world that often values youth and certainty over depth and complexity. Yet, despite those fears, there was a quiet determination in both of us to see beyond the expected, to find value in the spaces where life had left its marks, in the stories that shaped us rather than defined us. Her voice softened, almost a whisper, as she admitted how rare it was to feel this kind of genuine connection. And in that admission, I felt the fragile hope taking root, that maybe, just maybe, this could be something worth exploring. The night deepened outside the window, stars scattered across the dark sky like distant promises. Inside, we sat close enough to feel the warmth radiating from each other, the gentle rise and fall of breaths sinking in a rhythm both new and familiar. There was no grand declaration, no sudden rush of emotion, only the slow, steady building of something real. A trust born from shared vulnerabilities and the courage to be seen as we truly were. As I looked at her, I saw not just the woman before me, but the story she carried, the strength beneath her quiet grace, and the possibility of something tender and enduring. And in that quiet space, between words and touches, I understood that love, real love, sometimes begins not with fireworks, but with the courage to open up and be vulnerable if there's a language in silence. A way two people can speak volumes without uttering a single word. That's what I found with her during our slow walks through the quiet park, where the world seemed to pause just for us. The air was crisp with the scent of fallen leaves, a faint chill wrapping around us like a secret kept between old friends. We walked side by side, close enough that our shoulders almost brushed, but careful not to cross the invisible line between comfort and something more. Every step carried the weight of unsaid things, desires carefully folded beneath restraint, feelings hovering just beneath the surface. Her presence was a quiet warmth beside me, steady and reassuring. I noticed how her fingers curled just slightly as she held her coat closed against the cool air, and the way her breath formed soft clouds that dissipated into the twilight. The gentle sway of her hair in the breeze caught my eye, each strand seeming to dance with the fading light. Our eyes met often, and in those lingering glances, a delicate tension blossomed. They weren't the bold, passionate looks you see in movies. No, these were subtle and restrained, like a secret shared only between us. A slight hesitation, a flash of vulnerability, a silent question. I could feel my pulse quicken every time our gazes locked, the quiet electricity sending shivers down my spine. Once, as we paused by a wrought iron fence overlooking the river, I caught her watching me from beneath her lashes, her eyes soft but intense. I wanted to reach out, to brush a stray curl from her cheek or to hold her hand, but I held back, respecting the fragile pace at which this was unfolding. Instead, I let my fingers graze the fabric of my jacket, grounding myself in the moment. The silence between us was comfortable, yet heavy with possibility. It was in these pauses that the true weight of our connection became clear, not through words, but through presence. I realized how much the age gap that separated us was present in the quiet spaces. There was a history etched in the lines around her eyes, a depth in her laughter that spoke of years I had yet to live. And yet, instead of feeling distant or out of place, I found myself drawn to that wisdom, that quiet assurance that comes only with experience. She wasn't just a woman older than me. She was a world I wanted to explore, full of stories, lessons, and unspoken dreams. And in those silent moments, I hoped she might see me not as a younger man unsure of himself, but as someone willing to walk beside her, step by careful step. At one point, the wind picked up, and she instinctively stepped closer, her shoulder brushing against mine. The contact was brief, but it sent a warm ripple through me, a reminder that sometimes the smallest touches speak the loudest. I caught the faint scent of her perfume, something soft, floral, and comforting. It wrapped around me like a memory I hadn't yet lived but longed to. The warmth of her body, so near, made the chill in the air fade away, even if just for a moment. She didn't pull back, neither did I. We remained there, side by side, letting the silence stretch, each of us caught in the quiet tension between desire and hesitation. It was a dance without music, a language without words, a delicate balance between reaching out and holding back. Every glance, every touch of fabric, every shared breath was a note in a song only we could hear. I wanted to tell her how much I admired her, the way she carried herself with such grace, the strength in her vulnerability. But the words felt too heavy, too soon. Instead, I let my eyes speak, hoping she could read the quiet devotion I felt. She gave me a small smile, almost imperceptible, but enough. It was a fragile promise, a gentle acknowledgement that we were both feeling the same pull, even if fear kept us from saying it outright. As we resumed walking, the world around us seemed to soften. The crunch of leaves beneath our feet, the distant hum of the city, the fading light of dusk. It all became part of the tapestry weaving us together, moment by slow moment. I thought about how these lingering glances were more than just looks. They were bridges across the gap of years and experiences, a silent conversation of hearts slowly opening. The night air grew colder, but I didn't want the walk to end. I wanted to stay in that delicate space where time seemed to pause, where we could simply exist side by side without the need for words or explanations. Before we parted, she turned to me one last time. Her eyes held a softness that made my breath hitch, and for a fleeting second, I thought she might reach out to touch my hand. But she only smiled again, a quiet, knowing smile that said everything and nothing all at once. And in that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. The slow burn of something real, something worth waiting for, had just begun to glow between us. Sometimes, the most important moments come without warning, quietly, suddenly, and with a weight that feels heavier than anything before. For us, that moment arrived like a breath held too long, a tension that tightened between us until it threatened to unravel everything we'd been building so carefully. We had been growing closer in those slow, tender ways, the soft touches, the shared silences, the lingering glances that said more than words ever could. But beneath it all, the fear lingered, the fear of what might be lost if we took a step too far, if we let the world see what we were becoming. That afternoon, we found ourselves at the little cafe where it had all started, the one with the tall windows that caught the afternoon sun just right. The space felt familiar and safe, but also charged, as if the walls themselves held their breath, waiting for what was to come. She looked at me then, really looked, with a clarity that made my heart stumble. Her eyes were steady, filled with a quiet urgency that stopped me in my tracks. And then she said it, the words that had been hanging between us like a fragile thread, waiting to be pulled taut. If you walk away, you'll always wonder what if. The weight of that sentence settled between us, heavy and undeniable. It wasn't a threat or a demand. It was a truth, laid bare in its simplest form. A challenge and a plea all at once. I felt my breath catch. Those words echoed in my mind, stirring a storm of emotions, hope and doubt, fear and longing, courage and hesitation. It was as if she had reached inside me and pulled out every fear I'd been carrying, every worry I'd kept locked away. For a moment, I was frozen, paralyzed by the magnitude of the choice before me. To walk away would be safe, predictable, easy, but it would leave a hollow ache, a silent question that would haunt me in the quiet hours. To stay meant facing the unknown, risking rejection, judgment, and the vulnerability that came with opening my heart. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the courage shining in her eyes. She was standing at the edge too, ready to leap but afraid of the fall. Her hands trembled slightly, fingers twisting a napkin as if grounding herself. The cafe buzzed softly around us, the clinking of cups, the murmur of voices, but inside, everything felt still. Time slowed to the rhythm of our shared heartbeat. Every second stretched out and waited with possibility. I reached out slowly, hesitating only for a moment before letting my fingers brush against her hand. The contact was gentle, tentative, but enough to bridge the space that fear had created. She didn't pull away. Instead, her fingers curled lightly around mine, anchoring me. That touch was everything. A lifeline and a promise, a fragile hope that whispered, "We're in this together." The moment wasn't perfect. It was raw and unsteady. There were tears in her eyes, not of sadness, but of relief and courage. I felt my own eyes sting as the walls I'd built began to crumble, the armor I'd worn to protect myself melting away in the warmth of her presence. We didn't speak for a long time. Words felt too small, too clumsy to capture what was unfolding between us. Instead, we simply sat there, hand in hand, letting the silence speak for us. I thought about the years that separated us, not just in age, but in experience and expectation. How the world might see us, judge us, question us. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was the choice to stay, to risk, to hope. She leaned her head gently against my shoulder, and I felt the steady beat of her heart, a quiet reassurance that we were not alone. The warmth of her breath against my skin was a balm to my fear, a reminder that vulnerability was not weakness, but strength. And as the sun dipped lower in the sky, casting a golden glow through the windows, I realized that this was what it meant to take a leap, not into certainty, but into possibility. The fear didn't disappear. It never does, but it was no longer a barrier. It was part of the journey we were choosing to walk together. Because sometimes, the hardest choice is also the most beautiful one. The choice to face the unknown with an open heart, to embrace the what-if rather than be haunted by it. That afternoon, I understood that love doesn't always arrive with fireworks and grand declarations. Sometimes, it comes softly, through a quiet truth spoken, a trembling hand held, a shared breath in the midst of uncertainty. And that was enough. That there's a moment in every story when the weight of hesitation finally gives way to courage, a fragile, trembling step towards something new. For us, that moment came quietly, without fanfare or grand gestures, but with a depth that made the world around us seem to hold its breath. It was later in the evening, after a day full of small conversations and stolen glances, when we found ourselves alone once more. The room was bathed in soft golden light, casting gentle shadows that seemed to wrap around us like a protective cloak. The outside world felt distant, reduced to nothing more than a faint hum beyond the window. She sat across from me, the lines of her face softened by the warm glow. Her eyes met mine, not with the guardedness I had seen before, but with something open, vulnerable, and real. The kind of look that said she was ready to let me in, if only I dared to reach out. I felt my heart quicken, the familiar mix of hope and fear swirling in my chest. The years between us suddenly seemed less significant, eclipsed by the rawness of the moment unfolding. I wanted to speak, to say all the things I'd held back, about how much she meant to me, about the longing I'd tried to silence. but words felt inadequate, fragile against the weight of what we were about to share. Instead, I let my hand move slowly, tentatively across the space between us. When my fingers brushed against her cheek, soft and warm beneath my touch, it was as if a barrier dissolved. Her skin was tender, alive with a quiet heat that seemed to pulse beneath the surface. She closed her eyes for a moment, leaning into the touch like a flower turning toward the sun. The faintest sigh escaped her lips, a sound filled with relief and trust. I let my palm rest lightly against her skin, memorizing the contours of her face as if committing every detail to memory. Slowly, she reached up, her hand trembling just slightly as it found mine. Our fingers intertwined, hesitant at first, then firmer, as if discovering a rhythm that was uniquely ours. The simple act of holding hands became a declaration, a promise spoken without words. The room seemed to grow warmer, the soft light wrapping around us like a tender embrace. I could feel the steady beat of her pulse beneath my fingertips, a steady reassurance that this moment was real and shared. Her other hand came up to rest lightly on my arm, the touch feather-light but charged with meaning. It was a connection that spoke of courage, the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, to take a step forward despite the uncertainty. I leaned in slowly, careful not to rush what was happening. My forehead rested against hers, and I felt the warmth of her breath mingle with mine. There was a stillness there, a quiet intimacy that went beyond physical closeness. It was as if our souls were whispering to each other in a language only they understood. Her eyes fluttered open, meeting mine with a softness that made my chest ache. There was no need for words. We were saying everything in the touch of our hands, the press of our foreheads, the gentle rise and fall of our breaths. For a moment, time seemed to pause. The world outside melted away, leaving just the two of us suspended in this fragile bubble of trust and affection. I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers and the way her eyelashes cast delicate shadows on her cheeks. Every detail was etched into my memory, the softness of her skin, the faint scent of lavender in her hair, the warmth radiating from her body. It was a moment of surrender, not to passion or urgency, but to something deeper and more enduring. The slow, steady unfolding of two hearts willing to risk everything for a chance at connection. She smiled then, a quiet, genuine smile that lit up her entire face. It was the kind of smile that carries hope, healing, and the promise of something beautiful yet to come. I returned the smile, feeling a sense of calm wash over me. The walls I'd built to protect myself were crumbling, replaced by a fragile openness I hadn't known I was capable of. We stayed like that for a long time, simply holding each other in a way that spoke of beginnings and new possibilities. No rush, no demands, just the tender assurance of presence and acceptance. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. There would be challenges, doubts, and moments of fear. But in that quiet room, with her hand in mine and her head resting softly against my shoulder, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, breaking down walls isn't about grand gestures or sweeping declarations. It's about the small, courageous steps we take to let someone in. And that night, we took one of those steps together. The evening settled around us like a gentle embrace, the soft glow of the setting sun filtering through the curtains and painting the room in hues of gold and amber. It was a quiet, ordinary moment, but one that felt profound in its simplicity. We sat together on the worn couch, close but not crowded, the space between us filled with a calm that spoke louder than words. Her head rested lightly against my shoulder, the warmth of her presence grounding me in a way I hadn't expected. I could feel the subtle rise and fall of her breath, the delicate rhythm syncing with my own heartbeat. Our fingers intertwined naturally, each small touch a reaffirmation of the connection we had slowly, carefully built. There was no need to speak. Silence was our language now. It held no awkwardness, no pressure, only the comfort of being seen and accepted as we truly were. I thought back on everything that had brought us here, the tentative glances, the whispered confessions, the moments of fear and courage. It was a journey marked not by grand declarations or dramatic twists, but by the steady, patient unfolding of something real and lasting. The age gap that once felt like a barrier had softened into a quiet understanding. It wasn't about the years between us, but the stories we shared, the vulnerabilities we embraced, and the trust we nurtured. She shifted slightly, leaning into me just a little more, and I felt the warmth of her cheek against mine. The scent of her, soft, familiar, wrapped around me like a cherished memory. In that simple gesture, there was a tenderness that spoke of healing, of new beginnings. I traced a finger along the back of her hand, marveling at how such a small touch could carry so much meaning. It was a promise, an invitation, a quiet assurance that whatever came next, we would face it together. Outside, the world was fading into twilight, the first stars beginning to twinkle in the deepening sky. Inside, our shared space felt like a sanctuary, a place where judgment and fear had no hold, where we could simply be. She lifted her eyes to meet mine, her gaze steady and warm. There was a softness there that made my heart ache, a beautiful mix of gratitude, hope, and something that felt very much like love. "I never thought I'd find this," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Not like this, not with you." I smiled, feeling a swell of emotion that was both exhilarating and humbling. "Neither did I replied softly. "But maybe that's what makes it real." We sat like that for a long time, wrapped in the quiet intimacy that comes from shared vulnerability and mutual respect. There was no rush to define what we had, no pressure to fit it into any neat category. Instead, we allowed the connection to breathe, to grow at its own pace, rooted in honesty, affection, and a deep understanding of each other's hearts. As the night deepened, I realized how much this slow, steady love had changed me. It had taught me patience, courage, and the beauty of truly seeing someone beyond surface and expectation. She was more than just an older woman to me. She was a source of strength and tenderness, a reminder that love doesn't always follow the rules or timelines we expect. It was messy and complicated, yes, but also breathtakingly real. I felt a quiet gratitude for the chance to walk this path with her, to explore the what-if that once seemed so daunting and now felt like the most natural thing in the world. Her fingers squeezed mine gently, a small, grounding gesture that spoke volumes. In that touch, I found reassurance and a renewed sense of hope. The future was uncertain, as it always is. But with her beside me, I felt ready to face whatever came next. Because sometimes, the greatest love stories aren't about perfect endings. They're about embracing the imperfect, the unexpected, and the beautifully human moments in between. And this slow, unfolding love was exactly that. As I closed my eyes, feeling the steady warmth of her hand in mine, I knew one thing for certain. Whatever happened, I would never walk away and wonder. Because sometimes, the bravest choice is simply to stay and see where the heart leads.